The sun hung low over the humid expanse of the Florida Everglades, casting long shadows across the tangled mangroves and murky waterways. In this wild, untamed corner of the American South, where the line between civilization and wilderness blurred like the horizon on a foggy morning, the Johnson family had called their patch of land home for 3 generations. Old man Harlan Johnson, with his weathered face and calloused hands from years of fishing and guiding tourists, lived in a modest cabin just off the main trail. His son, Tommy, a lanky 28-year-old with a buzz cut and a perpetual squint from staring at the sun, helped run the family airboat tours. They weren't farmers in the traditional sense, no cornfields or cattle here, but they were villagers in their own right. A tight-knit community of about 24 families scattered along the swamp's edge, bound by shared stories around bonfires and the rhythm of the tides. It was a sweltering afternoon in late summer when the unusual cries first pierced the air. Tommy was out on the dock, tinkering with the engine of their battered airboat, the kind with a propeller that roared like a chainsaw through the sawgrass. He'd heard gators bellow and herons squawk 1,000 times, but this was different. A high-pitched trumpet, desperate and raw, echoing from the deeper channels where the water turned brackish and black. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a grease-streaked forearm and paused, listening. "What in the hell?" he muttered, grabbing his binoculars from the cooler. Further inland, in the heart of the Big Cypress National Preserve, an elephant sanctuary operated quietly, a non-profit haven for retired circus animals and rescues from abroad. Elephants weren't native to Florida, of course, but in the 21st century, with shrinking habitats overseas and ethical concerns mounting, places like this had sprung up across the South. The sanctuary, run by a passionate veterinarian named Dr. Elena Ramirez, housed a dozen of the gentle giants on acres of fenced swampland, where they could roam semi-freely under watchful eyes. It was a far cry from the chains and spotlights of their past lives, but the Everglades' unpredictable floods and hidden sinkholes posed their own dangers. That day, one of the sanctuary's matriarchs, a 45-year-old Asian elephant named Mira, had wandered too far during her afternoon patrol. Mira was a survivor, smuggled into the U.S. as a calf for a traveling show in the 80s, her tusks filed down to nubs from years of performance stress. Now, in her twilight years, she moved with a deliberate grace, her thick grey hide scarred from old harnesses. Trailing her was Kaylee, her 4-year-old calf, born at the sanctuary 2 years after Mira's arrival. Carly was all playful energy, her trunk curling inquisitively at every rustle in the underbrush, her ears flapping like sails in the breeze. But the swamp had a way of claiming what it wanted. A recent rain had softened the ground, turning a deceptive patch of lily pads into a treacherous mire. Mira stepped in first, her massive weight breaking through the deceptive crust. She trumpeted in alarm as her legs sank into the sucking mud, the kind that gripped like quicksand, pulling her deeper with every struggle. Kaylee, sensing the peril, circled frantically, her small trunk reaching out to touch her mother's side. The calf's cries grew frantic, a mix of bleats and bellows that carried on the wind, pleading for help in the only language she knew. Tommy motored his airboat toward the sound, the engine's whine cutting through the chorus of insects. He wasn't one for superstitions, grew up on tales of Seminole spirits, sure, but he chalked most weirdness up to nature's cruelty. As he rounded a bend in the channel, the sight stopped him cold. There, half submerged in a boggy hollow, was Mira, her body tilted awkwardly, trunk flailing weakly as the mud climbed to her shoulders, and beside her, knee-deep but slipping, was the baby elephant, pressing against her mother's flank, trumpeting with an intensity that tugged at something deep in Tommy's chest. He killed the engine and poled closer, his mind racing. Elephants in the swamp? He'd heard about the sanctuary, seen their trailers on the highway hauling hay bales. But this was no routine patrol. These two were in real trouble. Kaylee's eyes locked onto him as he approached, wide and glistening, her trunk extending toward the boat like a hand begging for rescue. It was almost human, that gesture, pleading, insistent. Tommy's heart pounded. He'd pulled drowning dogs from the water before, even a stranded manatee once. But this was something out of a nature documentary right in his backyard. Back at the cabin, Harlan was nursing a lukewarm Budweiser on the porch when Tommy burst through the screen door, breathless. "Dad, you ain't gonna believe this. Elephants! Stuck in the bog out by Devil's Bend. The big one's half gone, and the little ones. Hell, it's like it's asking for help." Harlan set his can down slowly, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. At 62, he'd seen floods swallow whole boats and hurricanes strip the mangroves bare. But elephants? "Sanctuary must have broke fence," he grumbled, grabbing his hat. "Call Ramirez and round up the boys. Can't do this alone." Word spread fast in their little community. By the time Tommy and Harlan arrived back at the site with a couple of neighbors, big-armed guys like Jake Harlan, Tommy's cousin, who ran the local bait shop, the sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Kaylee hadn't stopped her cries, her small body shivering as she nudged Mira, who now lay exhausted, her breaths coming in labored huffs. The calf turned toward the growing group of men, her trunk waving urgently, as if directing them to the problem. Dr. Ramirez pulled up in her dusty Jeep, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail, medical kit slung over her shoulder. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, originally from Miami's Cuban Quarter, who dedicated her life to these animals after witnessing a circus abuse scandal years ago. "Mira," she whispered, wading in carefully, her boots sinking into the ooze. "Easy, girl." But Kaylee barreled toward her, trunk coiling around her leg. Not aggressively, but with a desperate cling, like a child holding on to a parent in a storm. The men exchanged glances, the weight of the moment settling over them. This wasn't just a rescue. It felt personal, almost sacred. Harlan nodded to Jake. "Ropes and planks. Let's see if we can shore her up." As they worked, the air thick with the scent of mud and salt, no one could shake the image of that baby elephant's eyes, begging in a way that crossed all species. Little did they know, the real shock was just beginning to unfold. The humid air clung to their skin like a second layer as the group waded deeper into the bog, the muck sucking at their boots with every step. Harlan led the way, his old fishing waders creaking under the strain, while Tommy and Jake hauled coils of heavy rope from the airboat. Dr. Ramirez knelt beside Carly, her voice a steady murmur of reassurance, though her eyes betrayed the worry etching lines across her forehead. The calf pressed closer, her trunk wrapping gently around the vet's arm, as if anchoring herself to the only familiar human scent in this chaos. Mira's massive form shifted slightly in the mud, a low rumble escaping her throat, a sound that vibrated through the ground like distant thunder, weary and pained. "All right, listen up," Harlan barked, his voice cutting through the symphony of buzzing mosquitoes and distant frog calls. "We ain't got all night. Tide's coming in soon, and that'll make this mess worse. Jake, you and Tommy rig the ropes round that cypress trunk over there. We'll loop 'em under her belly if we can get close enough. Doc, you got any sedatives? Can't have her thrashing and burying herself deeper." Elena nodded, rummaging in her kit for a syringe. "I've got something mild, enough to calm her without knocking her out cold, but it's risky in this terrain. One wrong move and we're all stuck." She glanced at Mira, whose trunk now hung limp, occasionally flicking droplets of mud into the air. The elephant's eyes, dark and ancient, met Elena's for a fleeting moment, a silent plea that twisted the doctor's gut. Mira had been through hell before, chains, crowds, the roar of engines hauling her from town to town. But this swamp felt like nature's final indifference, stripping away any illusion of control. Kaylee, sensing the shift, trumpeted again, sharper this time, her small ears pinning back against her head. She circled her mother, pushing with her head against Mira's flank, as if willing her to rise. The villagers watched, transfixed. Jake, a burly man with a tattoo of an alligator snaking up his forearm from his days in the Coast Guard, paused with the rope in hand. "Damn, look at that little one. It's like she's trying to tell us what to do." He chuckled nervously, but there was no humor in it, just awe at the raw desperation in the calf's movements. They worked methodically at first, the kind of coordinated effort born from years of pulling boats from shallows or hauling deer from the brush after a hunt. Tommy poled the airboat parallel to the bog, its flat bottom skimming the edge, while Jake tossed a weighted line toward Mira's hindquarters. The rope snagged on her rough hide, and they tugged gently, testing the tension. Mira responded with a surge, her powerful legs churning the mud into a frothy whirlpool. For a heartbeat it seemed to work. Her body lifted an inch, the mud relinquishing its grip with a reluctant slurp. Cheers erupted from the men, hoarse and triumphant, but the swamp fought back. As Mira strained, the ground beneath her gave way further. A hidden sinkhole yawned open like a trapdoor. She sank deeper, her belly now fully submerged, the water level rising to lap at her chest. Kaylee bleated in panic, slipping sideways and nearly toppling into the mire herself. Elena lunged, grabbing the calf's ear and pulling her back toward firmer ground. "No, Kaylee, stay with me." The baby elephant's weight nearly yanked the doctor off her feet, her boots sinking to the calves in the softer edge. Tommy jumped from the boat, splashing through the shallows to help, his hands sinking into Kaylee's leathery side as he guided her away. Harlan cursed under his breath, wiping mud from his face. "She's too heavy. We need more leverage, maybe the winch from the truck." He radioed back to the cabin, where a few more neighbors had gathered, their pickup trucks idling on the overgrown trail. Old-timers like Widow Hargrove, who ran the general store and had a soft spot for strays, coordinated the supplies. Plywood planks from a recent dock repair, chains from the bait shop, even a come-along winch that Jake swore could pull a submerged ATV from the glades. As the reinforcements arrived, the sun slipped below the mangroves, turning the sky into a bruised canvas of deep blues and fading golds. Flashlights clicked on, their beams slicing through the gathering dusk like searchlights. The air cooled slightly, but the humidity held fast, turning their breaths into visible puffs. Mira's labored breathing echoed louder now, each exhale a rattle that spoke of exhaustion. Kaylee refused to leave her side entirely, positioning herself on a narrow ridge of solid ground, her trunk constantly reaching out to touch her mother's ear, as if whispering encouragements only they could understand. Elena administered the sedative via a long dart, her aim steady despite the tremble in her hands. Mira's struggles eased, her body going slack but not unresponsive. "It's working," Elena said, relief edging her voice. "We have a window, maybe 20 minutes before the tide pushes in." The group formed a human chain, passing planks across the bog to create a makeshift bridge. Tommy and Jake lay down the first boards, their muscles straining as they pounded stakes into the softer earth to hold them steady. Harlan directed from the rear, his gravelly commands keeping the rhythm. "Easy now, don't crowd her. One at a time." They inched the ropes tighter, the winch whining as it hauled against the cypress. Inch by agonizing inch, Mira began to shift. Kaylee watched intently, her cries softening to whimpers, as if she understood the fragile hope unfolding. For the first time, the villagers felt the tide turning, the mud's grip loosening just enough to reveal the elephant's legs, caked and trembling but free. But then, as they pulled harder, something unexpected broke the surface alongside Mira. Not debris or roots, but a glint of metal half buried in the ooze, a rusted chain, thick and industrial, snaking from Mira's leg into the depths. Elena's eyes widened. "What the—" That's not from the sanctuary. Look at the links. Those are old circus restraints. The group froze, the winch's hum the only sound piercing the sudden silence. Harlan leaned in, his flashlight beam catching engraved letters on a tag dangling from the chain. Property markings from a long-defunct Florida carnival troupe, one infamous for animal welfare scandals decades ago. Mira had been rescued. They all knew that much, but this... It suggested she'd carried this hidden burden into the swamp, perhaps dragging it during her wanderings, weakening her without anyone noticing. Whispers rippled through the men. How had it gone undetected? Eleanor's face hardened, a mix of fury and sorrow. She must have been hauling it for years. No wonder her gait's been off lately. Brady, Kaylee trumpeted softly, nudging the chain as if urging them to sever it, her intelligent eyes reflecting the growing realization that this rescue was uncovering secrets long buried in the mud. The shock hung in the air like the swamp's mist, binding the villagers closer in their resolve. They redoubled their efforts, but now with a deeper purpose, not just saving a life, but unraveling a past that threatened to pull them all under. The revelation of the chain sent a ripple of unease through the group, the kind that settled in the bones like the chill creeping up from the swamp floor. Harlan's flashlight lingered on the rusted links, the metal etched with corrosion and faint etchings that spoke of a forgotten era. "Son of a gun," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the ghosts it conjured. Jake knelt closer, his thick fingers probing the mud around the anchor point, careful not to snag Mira's hide. The elephant shifted weakly under the strain, her trunk curling protectively toward the obstruction, as if even in her haze she remembered its bite. Elena Ramirez's face tightened, her mind flashing back to the sanctuary's intake records. Mira's arrival 14 years ago, emaciated and limping, but no mention of embedded hardware. "This changes everything," she said, her words clipped with the precision of someone who'd dissected too many injustices in her career. If she's been dragging this, it explains the uneven wear on her joints, the way she's favored her left side during feeds. We thought it was age. She pulled out bolt cutters from her kit, the heavy snip echoing like a gunshot in the quiet dusk. Kaylee's ears perked at the sound, her small frame tensing as she watched her mother's leg, trunk hovering inches from the chain. Tommy wiped sweat from his eyes, the beam of his headlamp casting erratic shadows across the bog. He'd always viewed the sanctuary as a feel-good operation, a tourist draw with photo ops and donation jars at the gate. But this felt dirtier, like peeling back the veneer of progress to find rot underneath. "How did it even get missed?" He asked no one in particular, his voice laced with the frustration of a man who fixed things for a living. Engines, hulls, the occasional family feud over property lines. Harlan shot him a look, the kind that said questions like that belonged to daylight, not midnight rescues. With the winch paused to avoid further strain, Jake and Tommy maneuvered the cutters into position. The chain was embedded deep, wrapped around Mira's ankle like a cruel bracelet, the mud having preserved it in a grotesque time capsule. Snip by snip the links gave way, each severance releasing a puff of trapped air that smelled of iron and decay. Mira let out a deep, resonant groan, her body shuddering as the weight lifted, not fully, but enough to ease the pull. Kaylee trumpeted triumphantly, a sound that cut through the tension like a child's laugh after a storm, her trunk slapping the water in excitement. For a moment, the group allowed themselves a breath, the shared victory knitting them tighter amid the muck, but the swamp wasn't done testing them. As they resumed pulling, the winch groaning under the load, a low rumble built from the depths, not thunder, but the ground itself protesting. The bog, disturbed by their efforts, began to bubble and shift, releasing pockets of methane that fizzed like soda on the surface. Elena's eyes darted to the waterline, now inching higher with the incoming tide. "Faster," she urged, her voice steady but urgent. "The current's picking up. If she slips again, we'll lose her." Harlan coordinated the final heave, his arms straining as he cranked the handle, veins bulging like ropes on his forearms. The villagers, now a dozen strong, with reinforcements like old Pete from the hardware store lending his tractor's cable, formed a ragged line, their shouts blending into a rhythmic chant. "Heave! Hold! Heave!" Mira's massive form emerged incrementally, first her hindquarters breaking free with a wet schlop, then her belly, caked in layers of peat that peeled away like old paint. Kali danced on the edge of the planks, her cries shifting from despair to encouragement, as if she were the conductor of this improbable orchestra. Tommy's muscles burned, his boots slipping on the slick boards, but he locked eyes with the calf, drawing strength from her unwavering gaze. In that moment, the Everglades felt less like a barrier and more like a shared adversary, the wild heart of Florida binding man and beast in a fragile alliance. Inch by inch, Mira's front legs found purchase on the makeshift ramp, her trunk rising to fan the air, tasting freedom. The group erupted in whoops as her full weight transferred to solid ground, the airboat and winch holding steady against the final tug. Exhaustion hit them like a wave once Mira was clear, her body collapsing onto the grass in a heap of grey folds, breaths coming in deep, heaving gasps. Elena rushed forward, checking vitals with a stethoscope pressed to the elephant's side, her hands gentle amid the grime. "Pulse is strong, sedatives wearing off, but she's stable. We did it." Kaylee nuzzled her mother's ear, a soft rumble passing between them. The reunion, a quiet symphony amid the chaos. The villagers slumped against trees and boats, passing around water bottles and candy bars from someone's truck, their faces streaked with mud and illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Yet the shock of the chain lingered, a shadow over their triumph. As they secured Mira with soft slings for transport back to the sanctuary, trucks and trailers rumbling into position on the trail, whispers turned to questions. Harlan lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the dark, and stared out at the bog. That carnival folded 20 years back after some big lawsuit, animals half-starved, trainers on the lam. Mira must have been one of theirs. Jake nodded, rubbing his tattooed arm. Heard stories, elephants chained in trailers overnight, no water in the heat. If that thing was on her all this time... Elena overheard, her expression darkening as she stroked Kaylee's flank. The sanctuary did a full exam on intake, but scans weren't as advanced then, or maybe someone cut corners. She didn't voice the deeper fear. That oversight, intentional or not, had nearly cost Mira everything. The calf leaned into her touch, trunk curling around her wrist, a gesture of trust that bridged the exhaustion. Tommy watched, a newfound respect settling in. These weren't just animals. They were survivors, carrying histories as heavy as that chain. By the time they loaded Mira onto the reinforced trailer, the moon hung high, silvering the mangroves and turning the swamp into a mirror of secrets. The convoy rumbled back toward the sanctuary, headlights cutting through the night, leaving the bog to swallow its revelations. But for the Johnsons and their neighbors, the night had etched something indelible, a reminder that the wilds of Florida held not just gators and storms, but stories of endurance that demanded attention. As dawn hinted on the horizon, painting the sky in pale pinks, no one could predict how this rescue would ripple through their lives, exposing fractures in the community and the sanctuary alike. The shock was far from over. It was only beginning to surface like the chain from the mud. The first light of dawn filtered through the canopy of live oaks as the convoy rolled into the elephant sanctuary's gates, the gravel crunching under the tires like brittle bones. Mira's trailer swayed gently, secured by extra straps to Jake's pickup, while the airboat trailed behind on Harlan's flatbed, its propeller still caked with swamp ooze. Tommy rode shotgun in his dad's truck, his body aching from the night's labors, but his mind raced with the image of that chain, rusted and unforgiving, a relic from a world he'd only heard about in hushed barroom tales. The Everglades stretched out behind them, a vast, indifferent green sea that had given up its secret but demanded a toll in sweat and resolve. Dr. Elena Ramirez directed the unloading with the efficiency of someone who'd orchestrated 100 such operations, though none quite like this. Sanctuary staff, volunteers in faded khaki shirts and a couple of full-time handlers fresh from overnight shifts, gathered in the yard, their faces a mix of relief and curiosity. The enclosure was a sprawling affair. Chain-link fences reinforced with solar-powered sensors, shaded barns filled with hay bales the size of small cars, and a shallow pond where the elephants usually bathed. Mira was eased onto a bed of soft straw in the medical barn, her massive frame settling with a sigh that echoed off the tin roof. Kaylee stayed glued to her side, trunk tracing familiar paths along her mother's scarred hide, as if cataloguing the ordeal. Elena knelt beside Mira, her stethoscope cold against the warm grey skin, listening to the steady thump of a heart that had endured more than most. "Vitals are holding," she announced to the group clustered at the door. Harlan, Tommy, Jake, and a few locals who tagged along for the ride home. Dehydration's the main concern now. Plus whatever that chain did to her joints over the years. We'll need x-rays, blood work, but she's a fighter. Her voice carried the weight of gratitude, edged with the professional distance that kept her from crumbling under the what-ifs. Harlan removed his hat, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, the lines on his face deeper in the morning light. At 62, he'd pulled his share of miracles from the swamp, saving a neighbor's kid from a sinking John boat during a squall, hauling a bull gator that threatened the docks. But this felt different, personal. "You need anything else from us, folks?" he asked, his drawl thick with the fatigue of a man who'd skipped sleep. Elena shook her head, but her eyes lingered on the villagers. "Just keep an eye out. Mira doesn't wander like that without reason. And that chain, I'll report it, but if you remember anything about that old carnival—" Tommy shifted uncomfortably, his buzz cut damp with dew from the truck ride. He'd grown up on stories of the defunct Florida Starlight Circus, a ramshackle operation that toured the Panhandle in the 90s before scandal shut it down. Whispers of animal neglect. Trainers skipping town with unpaid vets' bills. It was the kind of lore that flavored late-night fishing trips. But connecting it to Mira, that chain wasn't just hardware, it was a thread, pulling at the edges of their quiet community life. "Heard my uncle mention it once," Tommy said finally, his squint narrowing. "Said they dumped gear in the glades when they folded. Maybe it washed up or something." Jake snorted, leaning against the barn doorframe, his Coast Guard tattoo peeking from under rolled sleeves. "Dumped? More like buried secrets. Place was a mess, elephants chained in mudlots, calves separated for training. If Mira was from there, no wonder she bolted." The words hung heavy, stirring a murmur among the staff. One volunteer, a young woman named Sarah with freckles and a ponytail, crossed her arms. "We thought her records were clean. Intake said rescued from a private owner up north. This could mean audits, investigations." The sanctuary's director, a wiry man named Victor Hale from Atlanta, arrived then, his button-down shirt rumpled from a hurried drive. He'd been at a fundraising gala in Miami when Elena's frantic call came through, and now he paced the yard, phone glued to his ear, coordinating with lawyers and wildlife officials. "Keep this quiet for now," he instructed Elena in a low tone, glancing at the villagers. "Donors don't like surprises. We'll handle the chain story internally." But his eyes betrayed the strain. Sanctuaries like this ran on goodwill and grants, and a whiff of past abuse could dry up the funds faster than a summer drought. As the locals filtered out, promising to check fences and spread word through the community grapevine, Tommy lingered, watching Kaylee nuzzle Mira's trunk. The calf's eyes, still wide with the night's terror, met his across the straw. It was a look that pierced, innocent yet knowing, as if she understood the human's role in her mother's pain. "We'll be back tomorrow with supplies," Tommy said to Elena, who nodded wearily. Driving home along the winding sanctuary road, flanked by cypress knees rising like skeletal fingers from the ditches, he felt the weight of it all. The Johnsons' airboat tours catered to families snapping selfies with gators, but this blurred the lines. Wildlife wasn't just backdrop, it was tangled in their history. Back at the cabin, the morning sun baked the dew from the porch as Harlan brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint. Tommy slumped into a wicker chair, his muscles protesting every movement. "Dad, you think that changed the end of it?" Harlan poured a mug, handing it over with a grunt. "Nah, swamps don't give up secrets easy. That elephant story's got more mud on it than we dug up last night." Word was already buzzing through the village, texts pinging between bait shops and diners, Widow Hargrove at the general store fielding calls from curious neighbours. By noon, a small crowd gathered at the Johnsons' dock, fishermen in stained caps, a park ranger off duty, even the local reporter from the Everglades Gazette, notepad in hand. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa Chen, whose family had immigrated from California decades ago, jotted notes as Tommy recounted the rescue, skipping the chain for now at Harlan's subtle nod. But Lisa's questions probed deeper. "Elephants in the glades. Sanctuary's been here 5 years without a hitch. What made her wander?" Tommy shrugged, but inside, doubt festered. Kaylee's begging cries replayed in his head, that desperate trumpet pulling at strings he didn't know he had. As the group dispersed, promising potluck support for the sanctuary, Tommy stared out at the channels, the water deceptively calm. That afternoon, Eleanor called with an update. Mira was resting, IV fluids dripping steadily, but the X-rays revealed microfractures in her leg from years of strain. The chain had been no accident. It matched photos from old circus archives Elena had dug up online, standard issue for the Starlight Troupe, abandoned after a 2002 raid. Worse, sanctuary logs showed Mira's original rescuer, a shady broker named Ray Kessler, had vague ties to the carnival's remnants. Kessler, now retired in Tampa, had sold Mira to the sanctuary for a song, papers rubber-stamped without full disclosure. Elena's voice cracked over the line. "He cut corners to offload her quick. If this gets out, it could shut us down." Tommy gripped the phone tighter, the pieces clicking like a rusted lock. The shock wasn't just the chain. It was the human hands behind it, greed that echoed from past to present, threatening the fragile haven Mira and Carly called home. As evening fell, fireflies winking over the marsh, Tommy resolved to dig deeper. The villagers had saved a life, but unraveling the truth might demand they confront their own complicity in Florida's underbelly of forgotten cruelties. Little did they know, the next revelation would hit closer to home, shaking the foundations of trust in ways no one anticipated. The afternoon sun beat down on the Johnson cabin like a relentless hammer, turning the air thick and sticky as Tommy paced the creaky porch. Harlan had retreated inside for a nap, his snores rumbling through the screen door like distant thunder, but sleep eluded Tommy. The coffee in his mug had gone cold, forgotten as he scrolled through his phone, the screen's glow casting harsh shadows on his stubbled face. Old news articles about the Florida Starlight Circus popped up one after another. Grainy photos of painted wagons mired in panhandle mud, headlines screaming about raids and rescued animals. One piece from 2002 caught his eye, a whistleblower's account of elephants left chained in flooded lots during a hurricane, their trunks probing the rising water for air. Mira's face could have been one of those blurred figures, her eyes hollow with the same quiet endurance. He pocketed the phone and grabbed his keys, the weight of curiosity pulling him toward the truck. The village wasn't much. A cluster of weathered homes and bait shacks strung along the swamp's edge like beads on a frayed string. But folks here knew each other's secrets better than their own. First stop, Widow Hargrove's General Store, a squat building with rusted tin siding and shelves stocked with everything from canned beans to fishing lures. Hargrove, a stout woman in her 70s with silver hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun, was behind the counter, tallying receipts with a pencil stub. Her eyes, sharp as gator teeth, flicked up as Tommy entered, the bell above the door jingling like an alarm. "Tommy Johnson, you look like you wrestled a gator and lost," she said, her voice a gravelly drawl honed from decades of haggling over bait prices. She set down her ledger, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron, evidence of the cornbread she'd baked for the potluck. "Heard about the elephant hullabaloo. Your pa called it dawn. Said you boys played hero? Coffee?" He nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. The store smelled of aged wood and fresh-ground chicory, a comfort amid the unease gnawing at him. "Yeah, black. Listen, Margie, about that old circus, the Starlight one. You remember it? Dad mentioned they dumped stuff in the glades back when." Hargrove poured the steaming brew, her movements deliberate, like she was measuring his intent. She'd been the village hub forever, trading gossip as freely as goods, her memory a living archive of scandals from Tampa to the Keys. "Starlight? Lord, that was before your time, boy. Ran through here in the late 90s, setting up on empty lots near the highway, elephants parading in the heat, kids throwing popcorn. But it went sour quick. Animals looking half dead, trainers hollering at 'em with bullhooks, shut down after the feds came sniffing." She leaned in, voice dropping. "Heard Ray Kessler was the ringleader's right-hand man. Slick fella, always in a cheap suit, buying up feed on credit he never paid. Vanished after the raid. But word is he peddled the leftovers, animals included, to whoever'd take 'em cheap." Tommy's grip tightened on the mug, the ceramic warm against his palm. Kessler, the name Elena had dropped on the phone. "You think he cut corners on Mira? That chain we found, it had their markings." She shrugged, but her eyes narrowed. "Wouldn't put it past him. Man had a reputation for burying problems, literally. Folks said he offloaded junk in the swamps to dodge cleanup fees. If that elephant's from his stock, no telling what else she's carrying." A customer shuffled in then, an old fisherman buying worms, and Hargrove busied herself with the transaction. But the seed was planted. Tommy left with a nod, the coffee sloshing in his gut like regret. The drive to the sanctuary wound through sun-dappled trails, palmettos brushing the truck's sides like whispering confidants. Elena was in the medical barn when he arrived, Mira dozing in the straw under a fan's lazy spin, Kaylee playfully tossing a rubber ball with a handler. The vet looked up from her clipboard, dark circles under her eyes, testament to a sleepless night. "Tommy, didn't expect you back so soon. Mira's improving, ate a bale this morning, but the leg, it'll need surgery if we want her mobile long-term." He hesitated in the doorway, the scent of hay and antiseptic sharp in his nose. "Found some articles on the circus. And Hargrove at the store, she knows Kessler, says he was shady, dumped gear in the glades. You think he knew about the chain when he sold Mira to you?" Elena's jaw tightened, her ponytail swinging as she set the clipboard down. She'd pulled the records that morning, yellowed papers from Kessler's hasty handover. Mira listed as a retired performer, minor wear and tear. No mention of hardware, no vet clearance beyond a cursory stamp. I confronted him years ago about gaps in her history. He laughed it off, said she was battle-tested from shows up north. We paid what we could, thinking we were saving her. But if he buried that chain story... She trailed off, glancing at Mira's bandaged leg, the white gauze stark against the grey. Kaylee ambled over, trunk curling around Tommy's knee in greeting, her touch surprisingly gentle, like a child's hand seeking reassurance. The moment stretched, broken by Victor Hale's arrival, his loafers crunching on the gravel outside. The director strode in, phone in hand, his face flushed from another call. "Elena, the board's on my ass. That chain's a liability." Peter's already sniffing around from an anonymous tip. He eyed Tommy suspiciously. "Who's this?" "Or local who helped with the rescue," Elena said evenly. "He has leads on Kessler." Victor's expression soured, like he'd bitten into a sour orange. "Leads? We don't need amateur sleuthing. Kessler's a ghost, retired off the grid. Stirring this up could tank our funding. Donors want happy endings, not scandals." But Tommy caught the flicker in his eyes. Nervousness, maybe, or something sharper. Victor had been the one to greenlight Mira's purchase, pushing for quick expansion to boost visitor numbers. Had he overlooked red flags to fill the enclosures? As Victor stormed out to take another call, Elena pulled Tommy aside, her voice low. "He's right about the risk, but we can't ignore it. Mira deserves the truth. If Kessler's involved, there might be more animals out there, chained, hidden." Kaylee trumpeted softly, as if agreeing, her ears flapping in the barn's breeze. Tommy nodded, the resolve hardening in his chest. Back on the road, he detoured to the village library, a small annex in the community center, shelves sagging with local histories and microfiche machines gathering dust. The librarian, Mrs. Ellis, a retiree with cat-eye glasses, helped him pull files on the circus dissolution. Buried in a 2003 report, Kessler had been fined for improper disposal of animal accoutrements, but the case fizzled when evidence vanished, likely sunk in the very swamps they called home. By dusk, Tommy's phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Meet at the dock. Got something." The sun dipped low, painting the water in fiery streaks as Tommy pulled up. Jake waited with a beer in hand, his truck bed loaded with an old metal detector borrowed from Pete's Hardware. "Hargrove called me after you left. Said if Kessler dumped stuff, it might still be out there, near Devil's Bend, where Mira went down. Figured we'd scan the bog edge, see if anything turns up." They motored out in the airboat. The engines hum a familiar roar against the twilight chorus of crickets. The detector beeped sporadically over roots and cans, but as they neared the site, it sang, a steady pulse from the shallows. Digging with shovels under flashlight beams, they unearthed it, a dented lockbox crusted with mud, stamped with Starlight insignia. Inside, waterlogged ledgers listed sales, elephants, trainers, even payoffs to inspectors, and there Mira's name sold to the sanctuary for $5 owned dollars, with a note, "Chain intact, buyer assumes risk." The shock hit Tommy like a rogue wave, cold and disorienting. Kessler hadn't just cut corners. He'd offloaded a ticking bomb, knowing the chain could cripple her. But why? And Victor? Had he known? As they hauled the box back, the swamp's shadows lengthening, Tommy felt the ripples spreading. This wasn't just Mira's past, it was a thread unraveling the sanctuary's facade, pulling villagers like him into a web of accountability. Carly's pleading eyes from the barn haunted him, a reminder that some truths, once dredged, refused to stay buried. The real storm was brewing, and it would drench them all before the night was out. The moon hung like a tarnished silver dollar over the Everglades as Tommy and Jake motored back to the dock, the airboat slicing through the glassy water with a low growl. The lockbox sat heavy between them in the flat-bottomed hull, its rusted edges dripping swamp water that pooled at their feet. Tommy's hands gripped the pole tighter than necessary, the wood slick with condensation, as if anchoring himself against the tide of revelations swelling inside him. Jake killed the engine at the approach, letting the boat glide silently into the slip. The only sounds the lap of waves against the pilings and the distant hoot of an owl staking its territory. They hauled the box up to Jake's truck under the harsh glare of the dock light, a single bulb buzzing with moths drawn to its flame. Jake popped the tailgate and they laid it out like contraband, prying the lid wider with a crowbar from the toolbox. The ledgers inside were sodden but salvageable, yellowed pages curling at the edges, ink blurred in places but legible enough to paint a damning picture. Mira's entry was midway through one volume. Female Asian, Estia 30 wires. Performer grade, chain hardware included. Sold to Hale Sanctuary, 5K cash, no warranties. Scrawled in the margin, buyer blind to priors, risk on them. Tommy's stomach twisted, the words hitting like a gut punch. Victor Hale's name jumped out, linking the sanctuary directly to Kessler's sleight of hand. "Son of a bitch," Jake muttered, his voice a low rumble as he flipped through another page. It detailed payoffs to local officials, bribes to skirt inspections during the circus's dying days. Elephants shuffled like inventory, Mira listed alongside calves separated for training, their fates marked with cryptic notes: sold, euthanized, or worse, disposed. Jake's tattooed fingers paused on a faded photo taped to the inside cover, a lineup of grey giants in a muddy lot. Chains glinting under floodlights, handlers in sweat-stained shirts prodding with hooks. Mira was there, younger, her trunk raised in what looked like defiance rather than performance. Tommy leaned against the truck, the metal warm from the day's heat, and rubbed his temples. The village dock, usually a place for swapping fishtails over cold ones, felt exposed now, like the swamp had followed them home. Victor's gonna flip when he sees this. He pushed for Mira, said it was a steal to boost the place, but if he knew about the chain... Jake nodded, cracking open a fresh beer from the cooler and offering one to Tommy, who waved it off. The fizz of the can opening cut the tension, but only briefly. New or not, this ties the sanctuary to that mess. And us. We just pulled the pin. Word of the find spread like wildfire through the village by morning, despite their hushed tones. Harlan was up at first light, frying eggs in the cast-iron skillet when Tommy stumbled in, the lockbox wrapped in a tarp under his arm. "Brought home more than mud last night, huh?" Harlan said, not looking up from the stove, his spatula scraping like he was digging for answers himself. Tommy laid it out on the kitchen table, scarred from years of family meals and poker games, and watched his dad's face harden as he scanned the pages. At 62, Harlan had seen enough shady deals, poachers fencing ivory knockoffs, developers buying off rangers, to recognize the rot. Kessler's ghost is haunting us now. Call the doc. And keep this from the reporter. Lisa Chend have a field day. Elena arrived by mid-morning, her jeep kicking up dust on the dirt drive, medical bag slung over her shoulder like armor. She spread the ledgers across the table, her dark eyes scanning with clinical precision, but her hands trembled slightly as she traced Mira's entry. Kaylee's rescue had bonded her to the Johnsons in a way that blurred professional lines. Now, this felt like betrayal. "Hale signed off on the purchase himself," she said, voice steady but laced with ice. "He was the one who met Kessler in that parking lot off I-75. I was just the new vet, fresh out of vet school. He told me it was a clean transfer, ethical rescue from a bankrupt estate." She paused, glancing out the window at the mangroves swaying in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets. "But this, it's fraud. If the board finds out, or worse, the feds, we're done." Harlan poured her coffee, black and strong, the steam curling like swamp fog. "What about Mira? She know any of this?" Eleanor shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "Elephants remember everything. Trauma, faces, even smells. That's why Carly's so protective. She senses it in her. But this chain, it was Kessler's way of saving costs, leaving the hardware to remind her of the circus without us knowing." Tommy watched Kaylee's face in his mind's eye, that pleading trumpet from the bog, now layered with the weight of human deceit. The calf had begged not just for survival, but for a reckoning. By noon, Victor Hale showed up unannounced, his sedan crunching gravel like teeth on bone. He stormed into the cabin without knocking, face redder than a sunburned tourist, spotting the ledgers immediately. "What the hell is this?" Elena, you dragged locals into sanctuary business? His Atlanta accent sharpened with panic, eyes darting to Harlan and Tommy like they were intruders. Elena stood her ground, arms crossed. It's our business now. That box came from the bog, your bog, Victor. Kessler's ledgers prove you bought Mira sight unseen, chain and all. Peter's tip? Probably from someone who knew. Victor's bluster faltered, his loafers shifting on the worn linoleum. We needed the animals to qualify for grants. Kessler was desperate. It was a deal. No one mentioned hardware. But his eyes flicked to the margin note, the risk on them, glaring like an accusation. Harlan leaned forward, his bushy brows knitting. Desperate or shady? Village ain't blind. We remember how you courted donors with rescued stars. But if Mira suffers because of your shortcuts... The room thickened with unspoken threats, the air heavy with the scent of cooling eggs and brewing storm. Tommy broke the silence, his voice even but firm. We ain't reporters, but this shocks the hell out of me. Kylie begged us villagers, to save her mom. Now we find out it's tied to lies. We're in it too. Victor's shoulders slumped, the fight draining like tidewater. Fine. I'll call our lawyers, bury this quietly, but if it leaks, the sanctuary closes, and Mira goes to auction, chained again, maybe. He left with a curt nod, the door slamming like a judgment. As evening fell, the group gathered on the porch, fireflies dancing in the humid dusk. Elena stayed for dinner, grilled mullet from Harlan's last catch. Sides of collards and cornbread, the mood somber but solidifying. Kaylee's image loomed in their talk, her desperate nudges a catalyst for this unraveling. Tommy stared at the swamp, the water reflecting stars like scattered truths. The shock of the box had cracked open more than history. It exposed fractures in trust. From the sanctuary's gleaming facade to the village's quiet complicity in turning blind eyes to the wild's undercurrents. But as they planned next steps, anonymous tips to investigators, support for Mira's surgery, the resolve grew. The baby elephant's plea had started a chain reaction, and whatever came next, they'd face it together, mud and all. Little did they know, the deepest secret was still submerged, waiting to drag them under. The night air wrapped around the Johnson cabin like a damp shroud, the swamp's chorus of peepers and rustling reeds providing a restless soundtrack to the tension inside. Tommy sat at the scarred kitchen table, the lockbox's ledgers spread out under the harsh fluorescence of the overhead light, their pages now drying into brittle relics. Harlan had turned in early, his snores a steady rumble from the back room, but Tommy couldn't shake the images. Mira's scarred flank heaving in the straw, Kaylee's trunk curling with that unspoken plea, and Victor Hale's face twisting in denial as he stormed out hours earlier. The director's threat hung heavy. Mira auctioned off. The sanctuary shuttered, but it only fueled the fire in Tommy's chest. This wasn't just about elephants anymore. It was about the lies that had sunk into the glades like so much forgotten trash. Elena had left shortly after dinner, her Jeep's taillights fading down the drive, with a promise to push Victor harder in the morning. But Tommy's phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Jake, his text terse. Found more. Meet at Hargrove's. Now. Tommy grabbed his keys, the screen door slapping shut behind him as he slipped into the humid dark. The drive to the general store was a blur of moonlit channels and overhanging branches, the truck's headlights carving tunnels through the palmettos. Hargrove's place glowed like a beacon, its neon open sign flickering against the night, a holdout for insomniacs and night fishermen. Jake's truck was parked out front, engine ticking as it cooled, and Hargrove herself waited on the porch, arms crossed over her flour-dusted apron, a shotgun leaning casually against the railing, just in case of gators wandering too close. Jake emerged from the shadows of the store, a manila envelope clutched in his meaty hand, his face etched with the same grim determination Tommy felt. Couldn't sleep either, Jake said by way of greeting, nodding toward the envelope. After you left this afternoon, Margie here remembered something, dug it out from her old files, keeps everything, this one does. Hargrove grunted, her silver bun catching the porch light. A village historian, that's me. Kessler came through here more than once after the circus folded, bought supplies on tabs he never settled, talked big about retiring south. But this? She tapped the envelope. Came in last year, anonymous. Thought it was junk mail at first. Inside were photocopies of faded documents, property deeds, bank transfers, and a crumpled letter on yellowed stationery. The letterhead read, Florida Wildlife Brokers, Kessler's outfit, and the body was a terse confession, unsigned, but the handwriting matched samples from the ledgers. It detailed off-the-book sales, elephants shuffled to private zoos, circuses, even overseas shipments disguised as conservation transfers. Mira's name appeared again, flagged with a warning. Hardware embedded. Disclose at own risk. Hale paid premium for silence. Tommy's pulse quickened, the words blurring under his squint. Premium? But Elena said it was a steal. Jake flipped to the deeds. Parcels of swampland near Devil's Bend, transferred to a shell company linked to Victor Hale's early investments. Not just the elephant. Hale's been buying up bog edges for years, calling it expansion buffer. But look here, permits for waste disposal, buried under sanctuary grants. Kessler dumped more than chains. Old trailers, meds, God knows what. Hale covered it to keep costs low, turned a blind eye. Hargrove lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating the deep lines of her face, earned from watching the glades swallow dreams whole. Victor's from up north, thought he could play king of the swamp, courted us locals with tours and donations, but always skimped on the real work. Fences, vets, that chain on Mira, tip of the iceberg. If the feds dig, they'll find toxins leaching into the water, hurting gators, birds, everything. She exhaled a plume of smoke, watching it dissipate into the night. Tommy thought of Kaylee's wide eyes, the way she'd begged with her trunk, as if sensing not just the mud, but the poison woven into her mother's past. They pored over the papers until the sky lightened to grey, the store's coffee pot gurgling refills that tasted more like resolve than caffeine. By dawn, Tommy's phone rang. Eleanor, her voice edged with panic. Mira's agitated, won't eat, keeps circling the barn like she's searching for something. And Victor, he called an emergency board meeting, says he's streamlining to protect us. Tommy glanced at Jake and Hargrove, the envelope burning in his hand. We're coming over, got proof he can't bury. The sanctuary gates creaked open under the rising sun. Do you still clinging to the fences like tears? Staff milled about uneasily, whispers rippling as Tommy, Jake, and Hargrove pulled up in a convoy of trucks. Eleanor met them at the medical barn, her ponytail frayed, eyes red from worry. Mira paced inside, her bandaged leg hobbling but determined, trunk probing the air as if scenting intruders. Kylie shadowed her, ears flapping nervously, a low rumble vibrating from her chest, a sound that spoke of inherited unease. She's reliving it, Elena said softly, stroking the calf's flank. Elephants grieve, remember trauma in waves. That chain triggered something deep. Victor emerged from the office trailer, his shirt untucked, face pale as the morning mist. The board was on video call, he claimed, but the screen inside was dark. This is private, he snapped, blocking the barn door. Locals stirring trouble. Elena, get them out. But Tommy stepped forward, envelope in hand, his lanky frame straight from a night of revelations. Private. Like the land deeds you hid, or Kessler's payoffs. He thrust the papers at Victor, who snatched them, his eyes scanning frantically. The color drained from the director's face as he read, the margin notes and transfers damning in the light of day. This is forgery. Kessler's enemies planted it. But his voice cracked, the lie thin as swamp fog. Hargrove snorted from the porch steps. Enemies? or conscience? Village knows your type. Build on sand. Blame the tide. Jake loomed behind Tommy, arms crossed. A wall of quiet muscle. Elena pushed past Victor, kneeling by Mira, who trumpeted softly at her touch, the sound laced with recognition. The standoff broke when a park ranger's SUV rolled through the gates, lights flashing but silent. Lisa Chen, the reporter, hopped out from the passenger seat, notepad ready, tipped off by an anonymous village source, likely Hargrove's doing. "Heard about a discovery in the bog," Lisa said, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "Sanctuary scandal. Elephants tied to old circus crimes?" Victor stammered, but Tommy cut in, voice steady. "Not tied, chained. And Hale here bought the silence." As rangers cordoned the area, demanding records, Mira calmed under Elena's care, Kaylee nuzzling close, their bond a quiet anchor amid the chaos. Victor was escorted to his office for questioning, his empire crumbling like the bog's edge. The villagers stood firm, their rescue of Mira now a catalyst for justice, unearthing not just hardware, but a network of neglect that spanned decades. Tommy watched Kaylee's trunk curl toward him in thanks, her eyes reflecting a world righted, if only a little. But as the investigators pored over the ledgers, a deeper whisper emerged from the files, a final secret about Kessler's last deal, one that could shatter the sanctuary beyond repair, pulling even the Johnsons into its undertow. The shockwaves were just cresting, ready to flood everything in their path. The sun climbed higher over the sanctuary, its rays piercing the canopy like accusatory fingers, illuminating the chaos unfolding in the yard. Rangers in khaki uniforms fanned out from their SUV, clipboards in hand, their boots kicking up puffs of dust as they cordoned off the medical barn with yellow tape that fluttered in the breeze. Mira had settled into the straw at last, her massive chest rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke of fragile peace, while Kaylee stood sentinel beside her, trunk draped protectively over her mother's flank. The calf's eyes, still wide with the echoes of the night's terror, darted toward the growing crowd, staff murmuring in clusters, volunteers snapping photos on their phones despite Elena's sharp warnings to stop. Tommy stood at the edge of the frenzy, his lanky frame tense, arms crossed over his grease-stained shirt as he watched Victor Hale being led toward the office trailer. The director's face was ashen, his usual polished demeanor cracked like dry earth. Hands shoved deep in his pockets to hide the tremble, Lisa Chen hovered nearby, her notepad a blur of scribbles, firing questions at anyone who strayed too close. "Mr. Hale, sources say the sanctuary's land deals involved illegal dumping from a defunct circus. Care to comment on the elephant's chain?" Victor muttered something about misunderstandings and pending reviews, but his voice carried no conviction. Swallowed by the hum of radios and the low rumble of an approaching news van from the county seat. Elena pushed through the tape, her medical bag bumping against her hip, and pulled Tommy aside near the pond, where dragonflies skimmed the surface. "They're pulling permits now. Environmental impact assessments on those bog parcels Hale bought. If Kessler's waste is leaching toxins, it could contaminate the whole preserve. Mira's blood work already shows elevated metals. That's from the chain, but what else is in her?" Her voice cracked, the exhaustion of the past days etching deeper lines around her eyes. Tommy nodded, his squint narrowing against the glare. He'd grown up fishing these waters, eating the bass his dad grilled on summer nights, and the thought of poison seeping into their world twisted something primal in him. Kaylee's plea in the swamp replayed in his mind, not just for her mother, but for the fragile balance they'd all taken for granted. Jake lumbered over, Hargrove trailing behind with a thermos of coffee for the group. Her shotgun left at home this time, but her expression no less steely. "Rangers found anomalies already. Old barrels half buried near Devil's Bend, stamped with circus logos. Jake and I marked the spots last night with the detector." Hargrove poured a cup for Elena, the steam rising like a veil. Victor's been playing both sides. Grants for conservation while skimming on cleanup. Kessler probably laughed all the way to his retirement condo. The widow's words hung heavy, a condemnation born from years of watching outsiders exploit the glades for profit. Inside the barn, Mira stirred, her trunk lifting to fan the air, catching scents of tension and strangers. Kaylee trumpeted softly, a sound that vibrated through the wooden walls, drawing Elena back to her side. The vet knelt, murmuring reassurances in Spanish-inflected English, her hand tracing the scars on Mira's hide, marks from hooks and harnesses that now seemed like a map to this unfolding scandal. "Easy, girl. We're fixing it." But as she checked the IV line, her phone buzzed with a text from the lab. Confirmatory tests on soil samples from the bog showed arsenic and lead levels off the charts. Traces that could explain Mira's joint issues and Kaylee's subtle tremors during play. The news van's arrival escalated everything. A reporter in a crisp blazer, stepping out with a cameraman trailing, microphone extended like a weapon. Lisa Chen waved them over, her reporter's instinct kicking in. "This is bigger than one elephant," she said to Tommy, who hung back by the fence. "The public's gonna demand answers. How a non-profit meant to save animals ends up poisoning the swamp." Tommy shifted, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. He wasn't one for spotlights. His life was airboats and quiet docks, not headlines. But Kaylee's gaze found him through the barn slats, her trunk waving in a gesture that felt like an anchor, pulling him into the fray. "We started this to save her," he said quietly. "Now it's about making sure no one else pays for the lies." Harlan pulled up then, in his battered Ford, the flatbed still bearing traces of swamp mud from the rescue. He'd heard the chatter on the CB radio from fishermen out early, and his face was thunderous as he joined the group. At 62, with knees that ached from decades of poling through channels, he wasn't built for drama. But family and the land ran deep in his blood. "Rangers talking evac for the elephants if the site's compromised," he grumbled, clapping Tommy on the shoulder. "Victor'll fight it, says it'll ruin the sanctuary's rep. But if that water's tainted, Kaylee could get sick too." The words landed like stones, stirring a protective fury in Tommy. The baby elephant's begging cries from the bog echoed louder now, a call that had dragged them all into this moral quagmire. As investigators combed the office trailer, unearthing emails between Hale and Kessler, casual exchanges about cost-saving disposals and asset transfers, the air thickened with inevitability. Victor emerged under escort, cuffs glinting briefly before being removed for questioning at the station, his protests drowned out by the whir of camera shutters. Elena coordinated with the rangers on Mira's transport to a temporary facility upstate, a safer haven with clean pastures. But her eyes welled as she stroked Kaylee's ear. "You'll be okay, little one. This ends the chains. For good." By midday, the yard emptied somewhat, the news crew packing up with promises of evening broadcasts that would ripple across Florida. Tommy lingered by the pond, skipping pebbles into the water, watching ripples spread like the scandal's reach. Jake handed him a cold soda from the cooler, condensation beading on the can. Villagers buzzing, folks at the bait shop saying we did right, digging this up. But Hargrove warns it'll split us. Some donated to the sanctuary, feeling burned. Tommy cracked the can, the fizz sharp against the humidity. The Johnsons had always been the steady ones, guiding tours, sharing nets, but this had blurred the lines between rescuer and accused. Elena approached, Kaylee trailing on a loose lead, the calf's steps tentative but curious. "They're approving the move tomorrow. Surgery for Mira first, then rehab. Thanks to you all, she'll walk free." But her smile was shadowed. In the ledger's final pages, a scrawled addendum had surfaced during the search. Kessler's last deal wasn't just Mira. It involved a hidden calf from the circus days, smuggled and sold separately, potentially still out there in some forgotten corner of the state. The revelation hung unspoken, a final shock waiting to surface, threatening to upend everything they'd fought for. As the sun dipped toward the mangroves, casting long shadows over the sanctuary, Tommy felt the weight of it all. Kaylee's trunk brushed his hand, a gentle nudge of trust. But the swamp's secrets weren't done whispering yet. The afternoon haze settled over the sanctuary like a veil of regret, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain as the rangers wrapped up their sweep. Yellow tape fluttered from fence posts, a stark reminder of boundaries crossed, while the news van's engine faded into the hum of cicadas. Tommy leaned against the weathered rail of the pond's edge, his calloused fingers tracing the grain of the wood, worn smooth by years of idle moments. The water lapped gently, undisturbed now, but he could almost see the ripples from Devil's Bend, the bog where it all began, where Kaylee's desperate trumpets had pulled them into this unraveling. Mira's transport trailer idled nearby, its ramp lowered like an invitation to a new chapter, handlers murmuring as they loaded hay and slings. Elena emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on her khakis, her face a mask of weary determination. Kaylee trailed her, the calf's small feet padding softly on the gravel, ears flapping lazily in the breeze, as if shaking off the morning's chaos. "They're green-lighting the move at dusk," Elena said, joining Tommy by the rail. "A facility in Ocala, clean water, open fields. Mira's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. The vets there specialize in joint reconstructions. She'll need months, but she'll heal." Her voice softened on the last word, eyes drifting to the trailer where Mira's silhouette loomed, trunk swaying in quiet anticipation. Tommy nodded, his buzzcut catching the fading light, but his mind snagged on the ledger's final scrawl, that hidden calf, a ghost from Kessler's ledger, sold off in the circus's dying days. What about that other one? The note said, "Separated at weaning, traced to private buyer in the Keys. If it's out there." He trailed off, the implication heavy. Elephants weren't meant for isolation. Mira's scars told that story, and Kaylee's clinginess whispered it too. Elena sighed, pulling a crumpled printout from her pocket. The rangers had digitized the files, cross-referencing with old wildlife databases. "It's real. A female, about Mira's age now, named Lyra. Kessler smuggled her south after the raid, offloaded to a roadside zoo that went under years ago. No current records, but tips point to an abandoned lot near Key Largo, chained to a post, forgotten like yesterday's news." Jake ambled over then, Harlan at his side, the older man's limp more pronounced from the day's tension. The village had rallied quietly, Widow Hargrove organizing care packages for the staff, fishermen donating fresh catch for the road trip north. "Rangers are heading down tomorrow," Jake said, his voice a low rumble. "If she's alive, they'll find her." Victor's confession cracked it open. He knew about the disposals, took kickbacks to look away. "Feds are building a case. Sanctuary'll reopen under new management. No hail." Harlan grunted approval, clapping Tommy on the back. "You started this, son. That little one's begging eyes. They changed everything." As the sun dipped lower, painting the mangroves in strokes of amber and crimson, the loading began in earnest. Mira stepped onto the ramp, with Eleanor's guidance, her bandaged leg steady under the support slings, a soft rumble escaping her throat, a sound of reluctant trust. Kaylee pressed close, trunk entwining with her mother's, their bond a living tether against the unknown. The villagers gathered at a respectful distance, faces streaked with the same mud-flecked determination from the rescue night. Lisa Chen lingered too, her notepad tucked away for once, capturing the moment with quiet photos. "This story's going viral," she murmured to Tommy. "Not the scandal, the save. Baby elephant leads villagers to justice." The trailer doors secured with a final click, and the convoy formed, Elena's jeep leading, followed by the hauler and a ranger escort. Tommy climbed into his dad's truck, the engine coughing to life as they pulled out behind. The drive north wound through twilight highways, past strip malls and billboards hawking airboat rides, the Everglades giving way to pine flats and open sky. Harlan drove in silence at first, the radio tuned low to a country station crooning about lost highways. "Proud of you, boy," he said finally, as the taillights of the trailer glowed red ahead. "Swamp took a piece of us all, but we gave back more." Hours blurred into the night, the convoy arriving at Ocala under a canopy of stars, the facility's gates swinging open to floodlit pastures. Mira was unloaded into a spacious stall, fresh straw crunching under her weight, while Kaylee explored the edges of her new enclosure, trunk probing the clean air with wide-eyed wonder. Elena oversaw the transfer, her team drawing blood for final checks. The promise of surgery, a beacon against the scars. Word came via radio from the Keys team. Lyra found chained but alive, her hide weathered but eyes bright with recognition as they cut her free. Mira's long-lost kin, another survivor pulled from the shadows. In the quiet aftermath, as dawn broke over the rolling hills, Tommy stood by the fence, watching Kaylee splash in a shallow stream, her trumpets joyful now, free of pleas. The shock of the swamp, the chain, the lies, the hidden sister, had reshaped them all, forging a community stronger against the undercurrents of neglect. Mira joined her calf, trunks intertwining in a dance of reunion and release, the weight of years lifting like mist in the sun. The villagers had answered a baby's cry, unearthing truths that healed more than wounds. And in that fragile peace, Florida's wild heart beat on, resilient and unbroken. What did you think of this tale of rescue and revelation? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the story.